I figured we've got to take a trip with our mind, whatever we can, let our mind travel. That's how this book talk came about. Now, our guest speaker, I'm sure many of you know, probably better than me, many of you have read many of Lisa's books. Just to name a few, a lot of people mentioned to me Snowflower and the Secret Fan, Shanghai Girls, China Dolls, and Dreams of Joy, On Gold Mountain, all favorites of many of our clients as well. And Lisa has done an amazing job in making Chinese culture very much accessible, right? So for this, she's been awarded many, many awards in the Chinese American communities. And she was also named the National Woman of the Year by the Organization of Chinese American Women. So congratulations, Lisa. Lovely to have you.
It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Now, just to make the conversation a little bit more interesting, I thought I might introduce myself a little bit briefly as well, because it's relevant to today's discussion. I am from Yunnan. I grew up there. The first time I took an airplane in Yunnan was to Xishuangbanna, from Kunming to Xishuangbanna. So ethnic culture, tea drinking, and mountains were part of our daily life. And everyone, when we were growing up, was very, very poor. My family was rationed probably 2 pounds of pork every month for a family of 5 people. And so we knew I could really relate to Li Yan's childhood poverty, right? And also with coincidence probably of equal proportions to Li Yan's, I was given a scholarship by a Thai banker from Krung Thai Bank. His name is Kun Suring, the president of the bank. And he told me the bank would pay my way to any school that I could get myself into. So I shot for the moon. And I got into Harvard Business School in 1994, and graduated in 96. As you can imagine, life took a very different trajectory after that. And I live in Berkeley, California now. So as you can imagine, me sitting here reading this book, the tea girl of Hummingbird Lane felt intensely, intensely personal and made me very much homesick. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you for writing about my home. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. A few words on the logistics of how it's going to go. We have collected quite a few questions prior from social media platforms. And we will go through a Q&A for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes in the end for live chat. So if any of you have questions, you can text in the chat box. Okay. Now, Lisa, one of the burning questions everyone was asking was, what made you write this book?
Oh, well, you know, first let me just say thank you so much for having me tonight. And thank you to everybody who's joined us. You know, I did see someone right away that I know, and so that was really fun. But as I'm seeing these names pop up, I'm recognizing a lot of people. And May, you wouldn't know this because you didn't grow up here, but there used to be a show on television when we were all little kids called Romper Room. And the woman would hold up this kind of magic circle and look out into the TV screen and say, oh, and I see Johnny, and I see Susie, and I see Lisa, and I see David. And I just remember as a kid just feeling like, oh my gosh, you can see me. So I just want all of you to know that I just am loving that I can see you, and I just think this is fun. So I don't know what made me think of that, but it did. So with this book, really, I had started thinking about writing about the one-child policy and adoption from China. You know, now I guess the one-child policy would be what, about 30 to 36 years old. So, you know, when it first started, and of course now it's a two-child policy, but when it first started, I had friends who adopted from China. I had people in my own family who adopted from China. And I didn't think about it too much at the beginning. But when those kids got to be about 8, 9, 10 years old, I started thinking about my own experience and wondering about them. So I grew up in a very large Chinese American family in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Today I have about 400 relatives just in Los Angeles alone. There are about a dozen,
Well,
the majority still full Chinese, and then this spectrum in between. And so when I was a kid, and I spent time with my father's side of the family, which I spent a lot of time with them, and I looked around me, what I saw were Chinese faces, what I experienced was Chinese culture, Chinese tradition, Chinese language, Chinese food. And of course, that's why I write the kinds of books that I do. But along the way, and certainly when I was younger, I would wonder, well, what am I? Am I American? Am I Chinese? Am I Chinese American? Or am I something else? And so as I started thinking about these girls, really starting to hit the age that I had started thinking about those things, I wondered about them. And I think it's very different if you're adopted by a family that might be in a city like San Francisco or Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, very cosmopolitan cities where you can go and get really good Chinese food, for example, and there are all kinds of programs you could go to. But I started thinking about if a girl had been adopted in a smaller town in the Midwest, for example, she might be the only Chinese face in her family, the only Chinese face in her class, in her school, in her church, in her synagogue, at the county fair. And I wondered if they had this kind of mirror experience to my own, where they, might wonder to themselves, well, what am I? Am I Chinese because of how I look? Am I American because of how I've been raised? Am I Chinese American? The answer is no. Or are you something else?
Yeah.
And so this was something I really had been thinking about for about 20 years when this one night happened and I just didn't know how to approach the story. I thought there were some very obvious ways, but that wasn't really interesting to me. And there was this one night I was going to the movies with my husband, and boy, wouldn't I love to go to a movie now. But I was going to the movies with my husband, and we were just crossing the street. And I saw up ahead of us an older white couple walking with their adopted teenage Chinese daughter between them. And she had her hair up in a ponytail, and it was swishing back and forth like this. And I had this vision of her as being kind of like a fox spirit in her family. And, May, you know this, that in Chinese tradition, fox spirits can be very naughty. They can be very mischievous. They're always doing things like sneaking into a scholar's study late at night. He's studying so hard for the imperial exams, and then she has sex with him. So, naughty and mischievous. But in their best manner, fox spirits have this ability to bring great love and to create families. And so when I saw that foxtail swishing back and forth, I thought, well, she really is like a fox spirit in her family, in the sense that through her presence, she had brought great love and had helped to create a family. And so truly, from the time we went from one side of the street to the other, I knew what the next book was going to be, but I also had my way into the story. And I can just tell you that for a long time, the book was going to be called The Fox Spirit of Hummingbird Lane. However, I ended up writing about the Akha ethnic minority, and the Akha don't have a fox spirit. So even when I was there, I kept saying, don't you have some little creature with a big bushy tail that has magical properties? No, they didn't. So they had all kinds of other magical things, but not that. And so really what I did was just still carry sort of the spirit and the idea of the fox spirit in my heart.
Yeah, so continuing on that, then how did you take the fox spirit and chose Akha as the focus of the group? As you mentioned in the book, and I also studied, there are 55 ethnic groups, well, 56 including Han, which I am. 25 of them are in Yunnan. And for the tea growing, one of the members in our audience is a Wa, also in the areas. Why did you narrow down on Akha?
So I had looked at all 25 or 26 that are in Yunnan, and I did narrow it down to 5. And, you know, some of them I could dismiss pretty easily. Yunnan is a pretty big province. So there's some people who, you know, will live by a lake and they're fishermen and they don't have anything to do with tea. And some who were, let's just be honest, a little boring. And then but some where I thought, well, there was one, I said the Balu, who are really known for the quality of tea that they grow, but the way they process it is even more complicated and complex than already how hard and complex it is to describe tea processing and growing and all of, you know, the whole process to people who might not have ever heard of it before. So they got, even though that was a very interesting group, they got left by the wayside just because of the complexity of how they process tea. When I went to China, I had really narrowed it down to 5. And I thought that really, I was pretty sure that I would be writing about the Dai people. And the Dai, you know, that's one of the larger groups in Yunnan. They are really known for the quality of tea that they grow. They're in the tea, you know, all aspects of the tea business. They also have their own written language. And of course, if you're doing research, that's a wonderful thing, is to have a written language, because you know, somewhere along the line, someone will have translated it, or it could have been translated into Chinese and then into English. And, you know, I really thought that it would be that group. But there did come a day on this trip where we went to visit an Akha family. Mm-hmm. It's very well known for the quality of tea that they grow and how they process it. They've had tea in their family for generations on the property that, you know, they have control over. They have many trees that are over 1,000 years old. Anyway, we were sitting in the family's tea pavilion, and I say that not, you know, even now I kind of conjure up a very traditional tea pavilion with upturned eaves, but this really is, you know, this part of China is really very remote. And this was just, you know, 4 sticks in the ground with some thatch on top, a dirt floor, the chickens wandering through, a pig wandering by. But the daughter, Abu, she was pouring the most unbelievable teas. Oh my gosh, they were just amazing. And I do have photos of Abu on my website. Anyway, she was great. And she, you know, the thing is she reminded me a lot of myself, half my age, and far more, you know, really just, you know, half my age, and very beautiful and charming. But she did remind me of myself in the sense that she loved to collect stories and she loved to tell stories. Yeah. So she started telling these stories about her mother and her grandmother, her own personal story. I used a lot of the details to create the character of Lian and her journey. And then she had also collected stories from the elders in her village, but also on her side of Nano Mountain. And so by the time lunchtime came around on the first day, I knew that I would be writing about the Akha and all of that other research I had done. I mean, hours and hours and hours, and just hours of research went right out the window. And then everything shifted and focused to the Akha. And then we spent 3 days with her family. And then the rest of the trip, again, I was really focused on the Akha. But then when I came home, then I was able to do a much deeper, we could almost say more sort of academic dive into the culture. And what was great is that whenever I would have a question, we could send an email, a message to her on WeChat. And if I did it at the right time of day, within, you know, 5 minutes, I would get an answer back.
Yeah, I need to find you on WeChat. So talking about this research thing, many of our readers, myself included as well, were so curious about how you did it. Like there is on-site field trips. How many of these field trips did you do? And then how do you find all the secondary research? Let's say which libraries you go to,
Right.
who do you decide to interview? Tell us about that process.
So I live close to UCLA. I spend a lot of time in the research library there. I have to say there hasn't been a tremendous, not very much at all actually written or published about the Akha. But I did find quite a bit of information on the internet. And of course, you have to be very careful when you're looking when you're getting information on the internet, who's posting it, why are they posting it, how reliable is it? But even if you're doing, I can't remember what they have on Wikipedia, but like even if you're looking, let's just say at a Wikipedia entry, there may be mistakes in the entry, but they do always have those footnotes. And so the footnotes can send you to other sources. And there is a site that it's a group that is really trying to help the Akha in northern Thailand. And so they have done a lot of work. They have a kind of, I wouldn't call it political, but they're very against the Thai government, and of course how the Akha are treated in Thailand is terrible. I mean, there's no question about it. But it is sort of more of a like an activist website, but had tremendous information there that I could then go and check. And then I would say one of the best things that I found, and I don't remember exactly how I got there, but it was one of those days where you're just like looking around on the internet, and I found the unpublished dissertation written by a man who had lived for 40 years among the Akha. And he had started out as a missionary in what was then Burma, now Myanmar, and then became an anthropologist, and then spent the rest of his life in northern Thailand. And so this thing, when I printed it out, it was about 850 pages. It was really in depth. He described every job, every tradition, every holiday, all of the things that have to do with weddings and giving birth and burials, and so really I could use it almost like an encyclopedia. And because he had lived with them for, with the Akha for so long, I could really trust what he had done. And because he had done it to get his PhD, I had to also believe that, okay, this is pretty accurate. But again, if I ever had questions, I could write to Abu, and then if she didn't know the answer, she could ask people in her family, she could ask other people in her community.
So how many field trips did you take?
Just the one trip.
Oh, just the one trip. Wow, it doesn't, I thought you must be like out there for 3 months or something.
No, just one trip, because I think because I do so much research ahead of time. Now, obviously I didn't have the material about the Akha yet, but I had done so much on tea and the Tea Horse Road and other things, so that I was looking for very specific people and very specific places and very specific kinds of things, that the trip itself was very packed and very intense. But like I said, then when I come home, I can do so much more at that point. And because of that, I've also now made connections in China. I can write to people and say, okay, what about this? Like I also spent several days with a very well-known tea master, Tea Master Chen. And he was so helpful to me. I mean, just unbelievably helpful. And that help that I first got when I was in China continued, throughout the writing of the book.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. One of the audiences, Trisha O'Brien, asked earlier, what is the most memorable thing about writing this book for you?
Well, I have to say that I have always been a tea drinker.
Uh-huh.
In the course of writing this book, I sort of shifted from being a tea drinker to a total tea snob. I'll admit it. And you know, there's so many sayings about tea and all of the great philosophies, you know, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, shamanism, they all have great sayings about tea. The poets have written about tea. Painters have done, you know, paintings of famous tea parties and things like that. But one of my favorite sayings, and it's one of the simplest ones, is drink tea, make friends. And I've really found that to be true. And so that idea that you could actually sit with one or two or three other people and really experience these really high quality teas, for one thing, where your senses are really coming alive, the scent, the smell, the taste, the feeling that it gives in your body. But you can do that for hours and hours, you know, 6 hours, 8 hours. And that it's in that sort of slowing down to enjoy the tea that also allows you to kind of slow down and really connect with people. So I know that may not sound like the biggest adventure, but that to me is what I've carried in my own life out of writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Many people have also asked, can you describe like pu'er tea? How different is that from, say, a Darjeeling or a tea made from Kenya? I mean, I am drinking pu'er right now, but I would love to hear your words.
Well, you know, one of the things that I love about Pu'er is that it has such an incredible range. And, you know, often people talk about the comparisons to, let's say, wine. And, you know, if you think about wine first, on one end, you might have those really light, pale wines like a Chenin Blanc. And then they can get richer and darker in color until over here, you'll have that really almost syrupy, kind of dark, rich Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc, so, you know, Cabernet. And with Pu'er, it's very similar, that you can start, you know, on one end, you have the raw Pu'er, and it's very light in color, pale yellow. To me, it's very, I love to drink it in the morning actually, because it's very kind of grassy and bright, and has a certain astringency to it. Yeah. And then as I go through the day, I like to drink older and older teas. And so, you know, again, just like wine, they get sort of darker and richer and a deeper flavor until, you know, you get over here to maybe a tea that's, you know, I do have one that's about 30 years old, but I also have a tea that's made from a single 1,000-year-old tree. And I've also been very lucky that, you know, people have given me some really wonderful teas and I've gotten to try them. But anyway, I will drink those at night. And it can be as dark looking as coffee, you know, like a black coffee.
Yeah.
And so that's a long way from that really pale yellow. And the taste is really rich and deep and smooth. And often people describe it as tasting like the forest floor or antique wood. So that's very different from a kind of grassy taste. So, you know, this is why I think you can't really compare it so easily to a Darjeeling, for example, or even just a simple, or, you know, a nice green tea, is that the range of it can go from 3 days to 50 years old.
Mm-hmm. See, this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize is Chinese drink tea in the evening. after dinner, and it would make everybody jittery and not be able to go to bed if you were thinking of it just like coffee, right? And I know from experience, my own brother, my older brother, is drinking Pu'er tea to lose weight. It's one of the cures there. Now, moving along, we had one of my colleagues, Kendra, who's in touch with you. She gave me this quote. It said, "Could tea be seen as a symbol of worth, a commodity that represents change in value for women and for China on the world stage?" She really liked this quote, and she also read many of your other books. And so the question is, can you talk a little bit about why you chose to focus on women in your writing, not just this book, but also other books, right?
Well, so why I choose to write about women, I mean, there's one really big, obvious reason. I am one, you know, and a little more than half the world's population are women. And yet I do feel that our stories have not really been told. I know there's some people here who've heard me speak before, but you know, so often stories about women have been lost, forgotten, deliberately covered up. We hear about women in the past. Oh, there were no women artists, no women writers, no women chefs, no women architects. You know, there were women, but supposedly they didn't do anything. But of course they did things. It's, again, so much of what they did was lost, forgotten, deliberately covered up. So that's part of it. But the other thing, you know, I not only write about women, but I do write historical novels. And I do think a lot about how we learn history. And that we sort of learn history, I think of it as like the kind of the front line of history: battles, dates, presidents, prime ministers, generals. But if you take you know, all those things we have to memorize in school. But if you take one step back off that front line, who's there? It's women, it's children, it's families. And they're there every single step of the way. It's just their experience is different. And I've been thinking about this a lot in this moment right now, because I have been talking to a lot of book clubs, but other kinds of events like this on virtually. And one of the things that's been coming up a lot is how much more work women have right now than most men. That yes, we still have our jobs, but somehow we're the ones who are supposed to make sure that our kids sit down in front of the computer and do all of their homework and focus on their classes, you know, as they're learning virtually. It's pretty typical that most women are the ones who put on their masks. I wear gloves and I wear glasses to go out to the market. You know, I love my husband dearly, but I think he's been to the market maybe 5 times since this started. So, you know, I see this with a lot of friends I have who have younger kids, that it's the mothers who really have to create a sense of safety and comfort in the home for those younger, especially the younger kids who don't really understand what's going on. So so you might have men out there on the front line of history, but it's the women who are really keeping the culture, keeping society, keeping home going.
Yeah, it reminds me of so much of, like, when I think about my family, there's always my grandma, my aunts. But so something very interesting about Yunnan is I'm Han, but it's very sort of sexist in a way, right? In the household, my aunts and all the women would be cooking in the kitchen, they'd be serving, and then they'd eat in the kitchen with the kids. All the men are drinking and smoking in the main dining room. Right. But one thing that trumps this sort of family social status is exposure to the world and education. Because it happened to me once I returned from United States back to China, I was invited to sit at the men's table.
Oh, yes.
The only the only women at the men's table. And I wonder if you were to, did you see something like this about for the Liyan character in Akha village? Do they share something similar like this?
Well, what was interesting was Abu, who I mentioned earlier.
Right.
She was the first girl in her family to go to school at all. I mean, she's the first girl in her family to go to school at all. And then, when she got through sort of the equivalent of high school, she really wanted to go to a trade school, but her family said, absolutely not. We know if you leave the mountain, you're never coming back. I won't go into all the details of her life, but she did, get to go to trade school. She actually was the only ethnic minority to be accepted into the Pu'er college, but on both tracks, one to become a tea master and the other to just learn to grow and process tea. And she, later went to Guangzhou and worked in the tea market there, but she did come back. And her status in her family, even though they've had generations of people growing tea in her family, but because she's now educated, she has a higher status, not just in her own family, but, in that whole area.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah. Now I know we have quite a few audiences from Yunnan, particularly you'd get a kick out of this. One of the lady here, Gloria Peng, her father was the general manager of the King World Hotel.
Oh, really?
In the early 90s. So when I was reading your book, some of these details were just dazzling. And I am amazed that it only took one trip, that you have all of this extraordinary detail explained. Now, but sometimes it can get a little tricky. I'll give you an example, some of the details. Like when Li Yan went to Thailand, she and the Akha women were sewing these ethnic tchotchkes for tourists, right? And I think it was in the early 1990s. The book did say something about them sewing for iPhones and computers, but I knew back then people were buying these little pouches to hold traveler's checks. That's pre-iPhone time.
I think by the time she gets there, I'm just trying to think the chronology, because that's the kind of thing that the copy editor really checks to make sure, did people have cell phones and things like that.
Right. So,
but my husband, our family had gone to that part of Thailand, I'm going to say about 15 years ago. I think, it was quite a long time ago. And we, did a total touristy thing where we rode on elephants up into these Akha villages. I didn't know that I was going to be able to use all of that all those years later when I was writing this book.
Yeah. It's just like in China, the era from 1995 to 2005 is night and day, right? So sometimes, like for someone who's lived there, it sort of goes off like, bing, oh, was that the era? So anyway, my larger question is, these days, it's fairly, the details like this get scrutinized. And I guess a lot of people are asking the same questions, like, it's a real challenge for someone who hasn't lived there or as an outsider to write authentically about different people.
Absolutely.
How do you deal with that challenge? And if you were to write this book again now, 3 years later, would you do anything differently?
Well, there are always things you can do differently. And I'm sure there's some details that, might not be perfect. But, the only thing you can do is try. I try as best I can to get it to be accurate. I did give the book the manuscript to a couple of people who I knew had spent a lot of time in Yunnan or had grown up in Yunnan. I mean, it is a big province, and so certainly life in Kunming or Dali is going to be very different than in a tiny village in the tea mountains.
Yeah.
But so, if somebody grew up in Kunming, they could say, oh yes, those scenes are accurate, but they couldn't help me too much about life in the Tea Mountains in 1988.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just try as best I can. I do make mistakes. In my most recent book, I definitely had a mistake. We were able to correct it for the paperback. But, you know, you just try as hard. I mean, I try as hard as I can. And I just try. And again, you know, if I have a question, I try to reach out to scholars and the people who live there and people who might, you know, know a lot about tea or adoption or the one-child policy, or, you know, whatever those different subjects were, or, you know, what life is like for the Akha in Thailand and how that's different than for the Akha in Yunnan.
Yeah, yeah, I applaud you. It's incredible amount of work. Now, moving on, I want to ask about the impact of your book. How have the Akha people, have they?
Well, here's something that's very
Yeah.
disappointing. The book was bought by a publisher in Yunnan. It was translated. I actually have the translation on my computer here. And then if you know, have to go back in time, if we all remember after Trump became president, he set up all of those tariffs. And China, in turn, retaliated. And and it seems so minor, right? But it does add up, is that they barred the publication of many American books in China. So the book was ready to go, but then it was the retaliation tariff that stopped it from ultimately being published.
So,
and so I hope that one day it will, you know, it's still on my computer, it's still on their computer too. So hopefully we will have better international relations at some point, and that the publisher will be able to go forward and publish it. But so
what a typical, it's so sad. That's too bad. But how has the Pu'er tea industry responded to it? Have they embraced the book as their ambassador?
So that has been pretty amazing. And again, I just hear this anecdotally where, you know, tea shops here have contacted me to say, you know, all these people come in, they want to buy this tea. We never even heard of it before, or now we have to order so much more than we used to. I have on my website the names of tea shops around the country that actually do Pu'er tastings. Not every tea emporium has that, but I don't want to sound immodest, and it's really not because, I mean, but I think it is because of the book that the awareness of Pu'er has gone way up here in this country, and that it really has had an effect on sales.
Yeah, you should absolutely take the credit. I think so many different sources, people come to me to talk about Pu'er tea, they refer to your book. So kudos.
And, you know, I was just this week, I think it was this week, last week, invited to speak at the big tea symposium that is held annually at UC Davis. And you know, people come from all over the world. It's not an expo, but it is this symposium where they do all kinds of academic talks and tastings and all kinds of things. And so they asked me to be a keynote. And I just feel very, very honored by that. And I, you know, if I think back 5-6 years ago, I never could have imagined that.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you've written so many bestsellers. I have only 2 more questions. One is, what is your secret? Is there a recipe?
If you never know what's going to happen with the book, and I don't think anybody really knows the recipe. I think I've been pretty lucky. I think that's part of it. You know, Snowflower and the Secret Fan was my 5th book. That was the one that really took off. It took off internationally, and I think a lot of people have followed me after since that time. But I also have a lot of new readers, especially for the last 2 books, starting with Tea Girl and then with On the Island of Sea Women. It's, much younger people now, because people get older, right? So there's a younger generation that's, let's say, in their 20s that are discovering me now for the first time. So that's been really nice. I mean, there are certain things that start to get built into just the publishing industry, where if you've had one bestseller, it doesn't always happen that the next one is, but if the next one is, then that really helps you with the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th. And it's because, you sort of start to build a certain kind of name recognition. And, I know I'm this way. I love mysteries. And so whenever Michael Connelly has a new book out, I go straight for it. So writers that I like, who are best-selling writers, but it's also because I can really trust what they're going to publish, and that the quality of what they do, and I like what they do. And so I think there are people who must, I guess, feel sort of the same way about me.
Yeah, no, you should see the comments in the chat room. So, oh my God, Snowflower is such, it just skipped, is such a brilliant book. I became a fan of hers because of Snowflower and many others. Wonderful. So the last question I have, then we go to the audience, is any sequel? Many people asked in the social media as well.
People ask all the time about a sequel for this book, and I think it's because the end, is a little abrupt, but I thought about that end, and that's how I always think of the last line first. That's the first thing I write, and so I always had this idea of how it would end and what would be said. I mean, I don't know if we want to really take time for this, because I'd love to hear the other questions from the audience. But part of this is, for me, is that I always think about what would happen in real life. And so, for those of you who haven't read this is kind of a spoiler alert, but, Leon would say hi, and the other one would say hi, and one would say, I think I'm your mother, and the other one would say, I think I'm your daughter. And then what would happen in real life? People would talk about what had brought them to that spot. Yeah. But, we know what brought them to, when we've all been reading the same book. I wrote it. I know what brought them to that spot. So I didn't feel that there was anything new to add. But there was one other thing, and this has to do with how I feel about books and reading. Because we tend to think of reading as being kind of a passive activity. You're sitting there, you're reading, the words come off the page, and that's it. But actually, I think reading is this unbelievably creative activity. And for anybody on the book, in this book club, who's in a book club where you get together in a room and talk, that everybody reads differently. Yeah. And so, what's happening is those words come off the page and you're filtering them through your whole life experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where were you born? Did you have a big family or a small family? Were they poor? Were they rich? Were they educated? Were you in Yunnan or were you in Sherman Oaks in California? I mean, all of these different things. Have you ever had your heart broken? Have you ever lost someone? All of that has those words are coming and they're filtering through this. And so in that way, I think of reading as just being unbelievably creative. And so I did have this part of me that really wanted readers to get to that last line and then let them think about what was going to happen next. And this is a question that comes up a lot. I get it in emails all the time, and I, sort of write back just what I said. And then I get back emails with all the things people think should happen next. They thought up things I never would have thought of. One woman, she even wrote to me a 10-page single-space letter, I know because I printed it out, of all the things she thought could happen. She had enough for a trilogy. I mean, she was just ready to go. And that made me feel like maybe I was right. And then on the other hand, it may just be that I don't know how to end a book.
No, here's the idea. Crowdsource the sequel.
It's crowdsourced.
right? Because
Yeah,
everyone will write their own. Yeah, okay, some wonderful questions. I think earlier, oh, okay, David Wang has a question, say Akha the same as the Hakka in Fujian.
No.
No, let me pull up the map and maybe you can use the map to tell the Akha and the Aini. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hakka are down in the south by Guangzhou,
Yeah.
and of course are so well known for the food. Their food is some of the best food. But then, you know, this is way inland, and yeah, you're showing it on the map. So there, and it's a different spelling. Hakka is Hakka, and Akha is Akha, and they're part of a larger group called the Hani, Hani.
Yeah, so when you look at the 56 ethnic group listings of Chinese ethnic groups, you don't find Akha.
No.
Under Hani.
They're sort of a subgroup of the Hani. I mean,
yeah.
They're not sort of, they are a subgroup of the Hani.
Right, okay. Let's see, another question. What other writers besides Connolly do you like to read? We now need a reading recommendation from you.
Yeah, well, of course I read and everything that Amy Tan has written. She's become a good friend over the years. I do like to read, and over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of new Asian American women writers mostly who are coming out with their first novels. And they're fascinating, and they range. The stories are so, you know, some are almost science fiction, and there's one, a wonderful one where she's working in her family's Chinese restaurant, and in real life, this writer had worked as a waitress in a Chinese restaurant, so it's very authentic to how, we'll just say how hard that work is. So I try to read those kinds of things. I like to find, or I'm always curious about books that have gotten onto the bestseller list where no one expected them to, you know, and that's something that happened with me with Snowflower and the Secret Fan. People said, nobody's ever going to buy that book. And of course, everybody was wrong. And so there's certain books that come along, you know, every couple of years that comes out of nowhere and is a phenomenon. So I would say some books like that would be Where the Crawdads Sing. You know, the publisher never expected that book to go anywhere, and it's been on the bestseller list for over a year. And it's going to be turned into a film now, and it's such a unique voice. I guess that's what I look for, is a unique voice that really tells a story that you haven't heard before. I'm always looking for that.
Yeah, wonderful. Amy Callahan has a question. Do you plan on writing any more mysteries?
Maybe one day. You know, you're the second person today to ask me about that. So maybe I should go back to writing them. You know, the thing about the mysteries that I wrote, and May, you were talking about this earlier, about how quickly China changed. And so these books took place in real time. So 1997, 1999, and I think it's 2001 or 2002, 2001 maybe. And so they're to me, they're kind of like little snapshots of China right at that time.
Yeah.
And everything is completely different now. So it's, and even though it's not that much time has gone past, but it's there, it's a geometric change. So anyway, for one thing, poor David and Hulan, you know, if those were written in real time, now they might have to go and do solve the crimes with their walkers or something. But I do sometimes, I'll just tell you very quickly a funny story that, you know, people do write to me about this every once in a while, and I have a sort of standard thing I write that, you know, they've been through so much, they're on a vacation, on a beautiful beach, sitting under a palm tree, you know, drinking those drinks with a little umbrella in it. And this woman wrote back to me, and I said, you know, maybe the one day they'll come back to work. She said, oh no, I see it, she wrote back. I see it. They're on the beach. they're under the palm tree, they're drinking their little things, and a big old bloated dead body washes up right on shore, right in front of them. And so maybe that's going to happen one of these days.
I didn't think you were going to go that direction. The gentleman was asking, Wei in Guilin was asking where to get your books. Are your books not available in China? I mean, in the US, it's easy.
Yeah, I think they should be. I mean, not everything has been published there, but most of the books have, and in Chinese. And then, of course, if you want
available in Chinese language,
I think you would find them very easily. But certainly on Gold Mountain, Snowflower and the Secret Fan, Shanghai Girls, and some of the other ones have been published in Chinese.
Okay, wonderful. And here's another question. What do you think of Maxine Hong Kingston?
Oh, I love her. And, you know, that book came out, her first two books, or those two books, Woman Warrior and Chinaman, came out when I was very young. And I actually gave Chinaman to my dad. I just think she's brilliant, and I just wish she was more prolific. And I've gotten to meet her many times. She's tiny little person, you know, but such beauty in her writing. And I think we really have to look at her. You know, Amy Tan became a big bestseller, but none of us who have written about China or the Chinese American experience would be here without Maxine Hong Kingston.
Okay, then that will be my next book. Then,
she's like a godmother. She's like, we can call her the godmother.
That's wonderful. Yeah, there's a question here. What inspired you to write about Asian culture? I think we touched on that at the very beginning. And just for your information, this session is going to be available both on YouTube and as a podcast on caixin.com. So you can listen to some of the earlier answers. Now, here's a question about a different book, which I admit I haven't read. I'm fascinated by Peony in Love. How did you come to write that story? Is it based on Mudan Ting, Peony Pavilion?
Right, it's based on, yes, it is, well, it's based on a story behind the Peony Pavilion. So I think it was in the year 2000 that Lincoln Center did for the first time in 200 years, the full production of the Peony Pavilion, all 55 scenes. It goes about 20 some hours. And they brought over everybody from China. It was groundbreaking and amazing. And I was asked by, of all magazines, Vogue, the fashion magazine, to write a little piece about it. And when I was doing the research just about the opera itself, I learned about what were called lovesick maidens, who in the mid-17th century they weren't allowed to see the opera, but they loved to read it. And as they read the opera, they would catch cases of lovesickness, like the main character in the opera, and waste away and die. And as they were dying, they wrote poems and stories, which were then published after their deaths. And even today, even in this country, you can find a lot of those poems and stories. And then there was this one group, 3 women, one right after the other, all married to the same man. You know, each one 16 years old. She marries Wu Ren, and she reads this opera, gets lovesickness, wastes away and dies. But as she was dying, she wrote her thoughts about the opera in the margins. Same thing happens to the second wife. Then the third wife comes along, and she also was writing her thoughts about love, about ghosts, about marriage in the margins of this book. And she pawned all of her wedding jewelry and used it to have this published. And so it's actually the very first book in the world written and published, or written by women, that is sort of like a literary criticism. And so it was their story of the three. It's, you know, the book that they wrote is called The Three Wives Commentary. And so it's that real life book and their real life story that inspired me.
Aha. Very interesting. I got to find that one as well. Now, here's almost the last question. What do you think of The White Devil's Daughters by Julia Flynn Siller? I haven't read that one, just heard her speaking.
You know, I haven't read that one yet. I'm sorry to say. I've heard it's wonderful, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I haven't read that either. And there were some very interesting, people were curious about how you grew up. There was a fun question by Mary Stevens, who asked, as a child, in what ways did Chinese food influence your family's menu?
Well, you know, I just think it's, you know, my grandfather owned a restaurant. He actually had the 7th family style Chinese restaurant in Los Angeles. It was called Dragon's Den. And he really was the cook in our family, and he taught me to cook from being a very little girl. And I just think, you know, even things like washing rice and how, you know, how you measure it when you put in the water, things like that. I can say that, you know, if I don't look Chinese, you can believe that my sons really don't. But when my older son went to college, there came a point in the winter where he was very homesick. And he said, you know, the only thing that makes me feel better is and he was in a dorm where they had 4 boys, 4 girls, 4 boys, 4 girls. And he said, I go next door into the girls' room because they have a rice steamer. And that smell of steaming rice was what made him feel like he was home, that helped him with his homesickness. And then just another little thing is, you know, but we were American too. And so when my grandmother would be the one who would make the Thanksgiving turkey, but my grandfather made the stuffing. And so the stuffing had, you know, it was like store-bought stuffing, but he put in water chestnuts, lapchang, you know, all of the black mushrooms, you know, and so that our stuffing was really, really very Chinese American.
Oh, how sweet. It's a lovely way to end the session, because my kids are mixed as well. And very often I wonder, how would they grow up? How would they identify themselves? And one of the few things that I started doing is taking my 11-year-old daughter and teaching her to chop with the cleaver. Mm-hmm. And I hope, you know, these little details of the culture will carry on. But thank you so much. You are total inspiration.
Oh, thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody who came tonight. I'm just so happy that we got to do this. And please, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, wear your masks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. Now, before I let everybody go, my team did ask me, I have to talk about our trips to the region. We do have in August 2 trips, August 4th and 18th, this year, next month, going to Yunnan Tea and Horse Caravan Road. Of course, this is for those expats in China already. For those of us who have to wait a year, next October, we have a tea expert, Jeff Fuchs. He may have read your book as well, Jeff Fuchs. He will lead our trip to Tea and Horse Caravan Road as well, October 15th, 2021. And we will have many more events like this coming up. If you want to follow, there is WildChina _journeys on WeChat, or email us, info@wildchina.com. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for taking the time. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.